Hello, Bloomers. Jillian here. In this second half, we speak more on interpersonal relationships, race, trauma, and epigenetics. This will be another good one, guys. I promise you, you are in for a treat. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the video.
Like when you're talking, it's like reminding me of kind of like, we're talking about specifically like romantic relationships or even, like just ones that you have in general, but, kind of bringing it to a bigger scale. I feel like that's kind of how people should deal with today, like with us having this huge race war and people that there's so much divisiveness with like all the different types of cultures and people that live in the world. I feel like that totally can translate to like, okay, this relationship to collectively, like to everybody, how they can relate and be like, if I understand this culture, I can understand why they might act a certain way. So I have more compassion when I'm, in contact with them. And, I don't automatically think that it's about me.
Right.
I'm not only seeing the world through my own personal lens. I'm seeing it through, okay, there's so many different types of people, cultures, sexual orientation, just ideologies, religions. So I'm not going to just be so reactionary to everything that's going around me. I feel like you can definitely take that to like that further step, you know what I mean, at large, be more meaningful.
Yeah, and with the interpersonal relationship, it doesn't have to be a romantic partnership. And the tools have become really useful for me in the race discussion. Like, nobody wants to talk about race. I haven't met anybody who was thrilled about talking about it. I grew up in a white community, and I understand some of the nuanced stuff with racism and the fact that people a lot of times don't know the things that they say and do that could be perceived as racist just because they don't have the feedback, and I know that just for my own safety, a lot of times I would let stuff slide that was uncomfortable, and I would try to give people the benefit of the doubt if they said something, just because I was in a world where I didn't have any backup, I was kind of by myself, and things happen daily. So it's like, do I want to have a good day, or do I want to like call out every single incident of racism and like educate people every single time something happens? And many times I would just be like, it's not even worth it. But the times I would, a lot of times it would be met with defensiveness, because there's this thing that happens in the brain of somebody who says something racist, and all of us are guilty of it at some point or another. Either against our own race or against another race. But when you say to somebody, I don't like the way you said that, this was offensive to me, that whole, no, I couldn't have said something bad. But it's not the intent that we're criticizing, because they didn't intend any harm. They didn't intend to hurt us most of the time. With these microaggressions, or there's some people that do mean to do you harm, but a lot of times when I would tell somebody, they would get so defensive because their intention wasn't bad, but that doesn't matter so much when you're hurting somebody. So even if I didn't mean to step on your toe, if I stepped on it, I stepped on it, and it's worth an apology. But somehow people conflate, saying the wrong thing and hurting somebody with, I intended to do it. And they're right. They didn't intend to do it, but they did it. And the defensiveness comes from, if I say something racist, I must be a bad person. And that's not true. Every person has biases. Everybody has judgments. How if you intentionally act from those judgments, that's not great. But all of us have biases that sometimes are blind to us, and we say things or do things that may be construed a certain way. But just to educate yourself on how you can do better in the world. And that's all anybody's asking is like, now that I've told you that this is offensive, try to do better. I'm not asking for a whole lot, but just that whole brick wall. No, I couldn't have said anything, bad, because that messes up my own idea of who I am, because I want to be seen as a good person. I wouldn't want to do anything offensive. So a lot of people retreat and won't even have the discussion. And I don't think that's very useful. I think it's great that a lot of people are educating themselves right now. And, I think going forward, we're going to be in a whole new place, just because of the amount of willingness to look at this issue and try to do better as a society.
Definitely. Yeah. I feel like just having that open dialogue, because, I totally can relate to what you're saying with like feeling like, okay, I don't want to say anything, I don't want to, be the angry back lady. I don't want to, make the situation awkward for everybody. I don't want people to be like, oh man, like she's just making this about race, kind of thing. What are some kind of language that you feel like you could give somebody who is experiencing that type of situation, where they can kind of have that and be like, okay, like if I experience this, this is something I could say or something I can be mindful of, so that I can be able to express it in a way that I feel comfortable. It gets the point across, but I'm not attacking the other person.
Yeah. The first thing I encourage people to do is to really get to safety in your own nervous system, because when it happens, when these microaggressions come up, the first thing that happens is some kind of contraction in your body. It either feels painful or it feels tight or something. And so really, identifying what it is that you feel inside. It's like my chest got really tight all of a sudden because they said something that, just didn't sit right with me. And just taking a few breaths and trying to, just notice those sensations in your body and notice that you actually are safe. Even if your body doesn't feel safe right now, if you scan around your environment, there's nothing that's actually physically threatening to you when somebody says something offensive. So just being present for a moment and taking a breath. And then even just saying the words back to yourself, what did they actually say? Sometimes it's a misunderstanding, or, they may have been thinking that they were making a joke and it just wasn't that funny or whatever, but what did they actually say? And then the next thing would be, do I feel safe to say something to them? And do I have to say it right now? Could I say it later? Do I have to actually speak the words? Could I write them a nice, well thought out message that might be easier for me to express, if I had a little bit of time to sit down with it and explain it a little better, so I don't have to be in this back and forth dialogue with them? Or maybe wait until tomorrow and just call them aside in private, so I'm not like outing them in front of everybody. So a lot of those things can be really useful. And I've been in those experiences where, both with sexism and racism, that, your face feels like it's on fire and you feel like there's steam coming out of your ears and can't breathe and your throat gets all tight. And I'm like, this is probably not the time to bring this up, because I can't quite find my own safety in my body. And once I am able to get a little bit of space and distance and ground myself, perhaps then I'll go and speak to them. And then you can come from a much calmer place, which induces calm in them. So if you come like, I don't like the way you said that, most people will, get defensive and, like they're ready to fight you. Yeah. But to disarm people, a lot of times it just means resourcing yourself and saying in a calmer tone, I'm sure you didn't mean to hurt me, but I'm going to explain to you why it did. And letting go of the outcome, because you can't control the outcome, but, giving yourself the power to say, this deserves to be said. And sometimes it's really not important. It's somebody you rarely see and it's just not that important. But if it's somebody you're going to be continuing a relationship with, sometimes it's worth saying. And it's worth proving to yourself that you can be safe and express yourself, and that you do have the power to speak up with your voice, and that you don't need to censor yourself, that you can speak out. And that can be really healing and empowering for yourself. But those are some options.
I think that's amazing, because I definitely feel like now everyone's like, you have to act, you have to speak up, you have to be doing something. If someone said, you got to calm out, and I feel like sometimes, like you said, that's not necessarily always the best thing.
Like Tamika was saying, like especially like in the times right now. I mean, there's never like a bad time to have a conversation. I feel like conversations like this should be happening more often. But I think right now, like especially like younger people, like we're in need of level-headed people talking about important issues, instead of just like the headlines of like, I don't know, like whatever YouTube video or like whatever news outlet is saying about everything that's happening, and like having somewhere to turn to have like that not moral compass, but like a guiding voice for like how we can deal with these things in a better way. So thank you. Yeah, of course. I think I do have a question. I don't know if we can include this, but One of my questions was, what are some of the most common issues that you see when people come in to ask you for help or like advice?
Mhm. One of the main ones is, or one of the most common ones is just either no sex in relationships or a mismatch in their sex drives, or a mismatch in their desires. Like one person may want to pull somebody else into the relationship, another one's not really on board with that, or maybe wants to be, but something's blocking them from being okay with it, or they're worried it's going to threaten their relationship. So those kinds of things are pretty common. A lot of women just, wanting to have more connection to their sexuality, that they feel challenged with that. And it may be, heavy religious shaming, that kind of stuff, that they can't break through, or just not understanding how their body is. A lot of women go into performance mode with sex, and so they don't really feel any pleasure. They're just like there to perform. And so trying to get them to, drop into their bodies and feel things more. And then with men, sometimes there's intimacy issues, which, and it disturbs them a lot, like where they just feel like they can only go so far as far as intimacy goes before they start feeling like their sense of freedom is threatened, and then they just shut down. That's pretty common. And or this idea that once they have kids, once the woman has kids now, like the Madonna whore thing, that that now they have a hard time being sexually aroused by their wife when she has kids. I have a few people like that. So.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. You know what? I feel like hearing that makes sense, because we all grow up in the same society, and we like, like it's not surprising, but it's still a thing that's not okay, that we keep feeling that sort of thing. It's interesting.
Yeah, and we don't see many images in like movies. It's never like the hot mom, It's like rarely. Nowadays you're seeing a little more of that, but it's it's even made fun of, so
yeah. Oh wow, that's really interesting. Let's see. Sorry, I'm so bad at asking questions.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
I feel like a little baby. I'm just like,
no,
tell me more, please. No. Okay. So no, that is interesting. Do you see any differences between do you have a lot of like younger couples coming to you? Do you have like mostly older clients? Like, do you see any differences? Because I know you were mentioning before we started the official line of questioning, that with like younger people, like they're a little bit more open. So do you see that reflected in the clients that you have, and what their concerns are based on their age?
Yeah, it actually surprised me when I first started coaching that the problems were kind of the same in all age groups. I guess as far as like experimentation with alternative lifestyles, you don't see as much of that in older couples, but you do see some, which you have your own mind about what people are like. That was a surprise to me when you'd see some adventuresome 60-year-olds and you're like, oh, look at here, but the 20-somethings, sometimes I'll see people that are like 28 and married and not having sex, and I'm like, that surprised me because part of my mind was like, oh, some of this is hormonal, and postmenopausal kind of stuff. But there's a lot of young people who don't have sex or have very little sex just because, either heavy conditioning from upbringing or something, or because there's some ambivalence about the relationship, and so their sex drive will dry up because they're like, I don't even, like I felt like I got pulled into this whole marriage thing, and now I'm like, I don't even know if I made a mistake, and then like, thinking about 80 more years with this person, like all that kind of stuff will mess with people's sex drive too. So.
Oh my goodness. Okay. And I think kind of along that same line of questioning, I mean, do you see a lot of people of color in your practice? Oh, I see Tamika. There we go. Hey, okay, I'll hang up here. But along that same line of questioning, kind of more about like what we were talking about previously,
in terms of the types of people that you see, do you see, like, are there some issues that come up when you are speaking with people of color in your practice in regards to sex and relationships? I mean, we kind of went over it, but like, is there a difference in the types of problems you see between like different races of people that you see?
Yeah, the one thing that I would say with people of color that I've seen is that there is more trauma in general in people of color. So sometimes you're coming into a relationship where both partners have had a lot of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and then it can really impact the way that they interact with each other. But also with mixed race couples, there may be, with this whole racism thing going, there's a lot of people who they have a lot of trauma around being a person of color and the racism that they've encountered. And then the partner may be just now waking up to some of the ways that they've been behaving racist or haven't been an ally in the way that they want to be. And so it can cause a lot of friction too. But with people of color, just because sexuality has been so repressed, as far as not talking about it freely, and just being objectifive in that world too, that can impact the way that we show up in our partnerships, and then also the freedom of expression sexually. So you kind of see two different things where there's people that are really, really open, and then there's some people that are really, really repressed, and that's one thing I've seen with it, and not a lot of dialogue going on about sexuality. So that can be challenging.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. So good.
Yay!
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm like, we got some juicy topics and all that. I'm like, about sex and all that good stuff. Trying to think. Sorry, I kind of lost my flow. Sorry about the whole like internet situation. I guess there was like a big power outage, like during my whole like section. So like my roommate, he's our IT guy, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, help me. But he's like, no, he's like, try doing it. I'm like, I did. I redid the router and everything, and yeah, I guess there was like a power outage and everything. But also, I got it back. I got my little mod back. So, Renee, you had talked about kind of ancestral trauma. Can you kind of talk more about that? How, why that's important to kind of have in your mind or to work on and think about when trying to, repair your mental or emotional health?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I've experienced in myself as I did my own healing. One is that with our lineage, there's a lot of things that were passed down to us just from the way that we interact with our family members. So there is a little bit of toughness in the Black family where kids are not coddled so much, and they're not, comforted when stuff happens in the same way that you see white kids being comforted. I remember as a kid when I would come home from school and there may have been a racial incident at school. My parents both grew up in the South in the 50s and 40s, 50s, 60s. So when I would come home with somebody said a racial epithet to me or something, I couldn't compare it to what they had experienced. And my mom marched with Dr. Martin Luther King, so it wasn't with people across the street with white hoods on. So it's not like my experience was the same as hers, but still, as a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old kid, it was painful to me. And so when I would come home and share that with her, sometimes there was a feeling like, your pain is not like our pain was back when we were marching. And it's not like they were callous and, they weren't trying to be terrible people, but it was almost like, it's just something you're going to have to suck up. This is the way the world is, just deal with it kind of thing. Instead of, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Come here. Let's, give you a safe place to land. And I see that a lot with not even just racial trauma, but with a lot of other stuff, that something happens to a Black child. And there's a misconception that we're tougher as people. We're resilient, no question about that, but we have the same nervous system. We have most race is not even a real concept as far as, genetically, there's more difference between people in the same race than between races. Yeah. So it's not a genetic difference. It's a made up construct. It definitely impacts us, as far as all the stuff that we go through, the way that we get treated by somebody who perceives us to be of a certain race. But the idea that we're tougher is just not real. It's like we have the same body that anybody else does. And so we feel pain the same way. We feel the same emotions. We cover it up a lot because the world, a lot of times doesn't reflect to us the tenderness that it does to other people. So, people think of us as being hard and tough and nothing bothers you, but we care. And sometimes we even think that about ourselves. I'm tough, nothing bothers me. I'm an independent person and nothing could ever bother me, but we store the pain inside and we just don't even feel it sometimes because we numb out to it. So there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score by somebody named Bessel van der Kolk. And he talks about trauma, that these little micro traumas that happen, unless they get expressed, they get stored in the body. And so either they just come bubbling up at some inopportune time, or they end up causing disease or something, so, but if you have two people in a relationship or more people in a relationship that all have a lot of trauma stored up that they haven't done much work on, it can really, cause a lot of friction. And you may not even know where it comes from. You may just consider this person cold or, something like that. But some of that is from historical trauma. And then also just the way that we've been, taught by our families to handle emotions and things like that. But then there's also this concept of epigenetics. So, if you look at DNA, there's these proteins coding DNA, which determine which genes express and how much they express and that kind of stuff. Stress hormones are impacted by that epigenetics. And if you or your people were, of a race that was treated poorly, throughout history, which, we belong to, that constant stress can influence the way that you express stress genes, stress hormones. So the genes that produce stress hormones is impacted by stress. And I like to think of the concept that, we think of ourselves being inside of our mother when we were, before we were born, but we actually were inside of our grandmother, because the egg that your mother, that produced you was inside your mother when she was inside of her mother. So the influences of the times of when my grandmother was alive, that influenced my genes. And so, some of the things that I don't even know where they came from as far as the feelings of trauma in my own body, I'm like, my story doesn't match this trauma. What's going on? Some of it's epigenetics and probably historical trauma that's gone on that got passed down to us. So, working through a lot of this trauma, people may say, oh, I had a pretty good experience. No way I have trauma. I think it's universal that all of us has trauma, and some of us more than others, but sometimes the story may not match the way it feels in your body, and that can explain some of that.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, oh, I love that so much. And there's a book that I read, so I was so happy that you said epigenetics. It's called It Doesn't Start With You, or It Didn't Start With You. And it talks about the epigenetics and how, like that's a big part sometimes people don't really consider when healing themselves, as like all the others, like layered, experiences that, are channeled through you that you experience and aren't even aware of. So thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think, Mike, I honestly feel like we've gotten so much good things. Is there anything else that you personally, Jill, did you want to say something?
No, go.
Oh, was there anything that you, Renee, wanted to talk about specifically and talk about?
Let's see.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah. As far as the sexual trauma piece, just, that's such a big thing in the Black community that we don't talk about a whole lot, but in some communities it's 50%, and the numbers are 50% for women, If you look nationwide, it's like 30% of women are sexually abused in childhood. And a lot of people don't realize the impact, even if they got therapy for it at the time, that there can be a lifelong impact from that. And unless you're doing the work, along the way, that, it's hard to function well sexually unless you're getting some support around that, or if you have really proper tools to be able to handle that. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense that you can get triggered from things and you may not even relate it to the trauma that you've had years ago. But a lot of times it can be a real sticky place for people as far as, their interpersonal relationships and stuff. So that's another thing I'd like to add.
Okay.
I also had a question to you.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have somebody who is, wanting to go and, seek out a therapist or, some kind of healing or counseling for mental health? Because I know with my own experience, I've always felt so overwhelmed of like, who's going to be the best person for me? Like, what are questions that I should ask to even see if this therapist is going to be a good fit for me? What are, is there going to be a therapist that, looks like me that's going to be available, with, insurance and the money aspect? What's some good advice of finding a therapist and good resources for people who may not have the financial means to get traditional therapy to help themselves?
Yeah. So one thing is trusting your instinct. One thing that a lot of people share with me when they come to me for coaching is that they've been to other places, and many times they'll know immediately that that person is not right for them, and they're afraid of either offending the person or they think something's wrong with them that they're feeling that way. But generally, if you're uncomfortable in somebody's presence and you're not able to open up the way that you're wanting to heal, trust that, and we have a intuitive sense of when something's right for us or not. It doesn't mean it's wrong for everybody, it's just wrong for you. So if you're in a situation where you're like, this person's not hearing me right, or they're misinterpreting my words, or they just don't understand me, trust that and get yourself somewhere where you can really be understood. And I think that's important. And most of the time, counselors or therapists are willing to have an introductory call with you just to kind of see if it's a good fit. I've seen that a lot, that they'll either discount the rates for the first visit or have like a free, limited call just to kind of see if your personalities match, which I think is great, to do that. But there's a lot of online coaching that's popping up now. Some of it's, through traditional things like psychotherapy, and some of it's like coaching like I do, which I'm a certified relationship and intimacy coach. But I've seen some other people that even call themselves heart-centered healers or other things like that. And they can be very, very powerful in helping you get the transformation you're needing. It doesn't necessarily have to fit in any particular box. But I would look at more what their philosophy is and what their background is like, than, saying they have to have a certain degree or whatever. But one of the things that is disappointing is the medical community hasn't put the power behind mental health that it has behind physical health. So, sometimes things are not covered well by insurances. That's true. So there are some group coaching or group therapy kind of things out there that are available for people who, just can't afford traditional therapy, one-on-one therapy, but those things can be really helpful too. And then there's some alternative therapies like the art therapy and music therapy and things like that that are very creative, and it just depends on the personality and the person getting the help, what they think would be most useful for them. But I would just do a lot of research and kind of figure out what area you want to work on and what kind of style fits you the best. It's just like shoes. There's no brand of shoes that's perfect for everybody. It's a personal choice.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Before we go, I want to have you introduce yourself, because I don't think we ever had you like officially introduce yourself. We kind of was just like, we were kind of just like, Renee, we've seen your stuff. So if we can have you really fast, just formally introduce yourself so that we can put it at the beginning.
Okay.
Awesome. So can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi. So I'm Renée Hilliard. I'm both a physician and I'm a sex, love, and relationship coach.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome.
What's something that makes your heart sing? What's something that like makes you feel, recharges you, energizes you?
I'm a big adventure person and I'm a big nature person. So I love hiking, skiing, sailing. Like I love being like with the elements and like just feeling like the power of the ocean in a boat, you know, just realizing how much power nature holds. And something about me, like me against the elements, turns me on. But I can't live without being out in nature. So I'll go for hikes at least a couple times a week, and that really centers and grounds me. And we were talking a bit about like the whole your system is a part of nature. We are part of nature. We think of ourselves as separate from it, but we're animals. And we thrive in nature and with the cycles of nature and the seasons, and we think of ourselves as being able to be on all the time and just pushing, achieving, but we really need that downtime and the rest and the recharging and the nourishment of our systems, just like any part of nature does. So bears go into hibernation, plants go dormant in the winter, and we think of ourselves as being able to push all the time and never have downtime. And the circumstances right now with having quarantine and taking things a little slower have shown us how much our nervous system can really, even though we're anxious about the things going on right now, a lot of times just slowing down and recharging is so necessary. And there's a negative connotation with rest. And, we shame ourselves for being lazy and all this other stuff. And some of that is actually post-slavery carryover, that if you're a slave and you rested, you died, so, yeah. So our families didn't really encourage a lot of rest many times. So just reminding yourself that I am a natural being and I do need rest and I need to listen to my system and nourish my system properly, and all that is really important.
Yes, honestly, yes. I feel like all the snaps to that, because, that's a big thing with me right now, is that's kind of my form of activism, is really taking that time to rest, to heal ancestral trauma, to have that, rebuild that connection within my own family. Because I feel like, like you're saying, you can't really be able to give if you're trying to pour from an empty cup. And I feel like, with everyone fighting for, racial justice, social justice, I feel a lot of times we forget that, yes, we can keep on, we need to continue the fight and bring awareness, have those conversations, but also rest. Take that time to really connect with yourself and center yourself of like, this is why I'm doing this. I am still a person aside from my activist work, and, the fight will still be there if I decide to take time off.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. And it's not likely to get better in a couple of weeks, so,
exactly.
So I really have to, it's an endurance game. It's like a marathon, or, so just pacing yourself where you can keep up the fight, or, the process for, it may be the rest of your life that you're working on unraveling this. Hopefully it shifts in our lifetime, but it may still be going on at the end of our lives. So in order to have it be sustainable, you have to replenish yourself and go at a pace that's sustainable, and not burn yourself out so badly that you're just crispy and done.
I like that, crispy. I feel like I want that to be a tagline, like, don't be crispy, rest. from Dr. Renee. Oh man, it's been really great talking to you. I feel like just so happy to have been able to get the wisdom from you, talk with you. You like spread so many pearls of wisdom. I'm like, like music to my ears. So many amazing like downloads, like hearing you speak, so much validation as well. And so, yeah, I definitely wanted to end it kind of with kind of advice from Dr. Renee, what you would give people. And so my question for you was, what do you think needs to change for the Black community to heal their trauma? Like, what's a first step that you think someone can do today to heal themselves?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is compassion. You know, we spoke a bit before about compassion, even with people who potentially have been perpetrators of racism, that, you know, sometimes it wasn't their intent, that they just were ignorant or, you know, didn't have a lot of experience, but a lot of self-compassion as well. You know, I've been educating myself more about internalized racism, and we all have that too, because, you know, it's poison that has infiltrated everybody's system in this whole world, you know, not even just this country, you know, white supremacy and, you know, all that. So just having self-compassion for the times that I perhaps have had a preference, you know, for something that's, you know, more European, or, you know, or looked at somebody and had a snap judgment. And even those of us in the Black community have that, or preference for skin color or hair texture, or, you know, body shame because our bodies don't look like the ones in the magazines and stuff like that. So just realizing that if you were in a place that was, you know, filled with smog, you're going to get some smog in you, even if, you know, with best intentions. If you lived in Beijing, you're going to be affected by smog. If you're in this culture, you're going to be affected by racism. But the self-compassion has to be there in order to heal, because if you don't have that, then you tend to turn a blind eye and no, I can't look at that because it's too painful to see the things that I have done to contribute, or you know, there's a lot of shame that comes with judging your own people and that kind of stuff. But part of the healing is really that deep work. Like, you know, of course I had certain judgments or certain feelings because, you know, my grandma said this, you know, if I went out with my hair like this, aren't you going to do your hair? Like, you know, like I'm sure there were, you know, just things from when I was really little that piled up and made me not love myself the way I could have if I had been in a culture that reflected my beauty to me. And it's not my fault. It's just, you know, that's what happened. But I also can, you know, hold myself with tenderness and say, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. And like, from here forward, I'm going to love you deeply. And like, we're going to heal from this, you know, and talking to yourself and your inner dialogue, just, you know, I'm so sorry that you experienced these things. And you may never hear that from anybody else, but just telling yourself, I'm so sorry that when you were 7 and they showed that slave movie in school, that the little white girl that was crying got the comfort, but you didn't get any. And I'm so sorry, you know, because, you know, many of us had those experiences and never got any compassion for them. But I think there's a lot of looking outside for validation still, even with this, you know, with the awareness of the racism, that I need them to admit that they did these things in order for me to be well. And that's really not true. If nobody ever admitted it, you can still be well inside yourself and do the deep healing that, you know, brings you back to self-love and self-compassion and, you know, restore balance inside your own system. And that's a place of power, not looking for somebody else to validate me. I validate me. Yeah.
Ooh, I'm like, snap. I'm like, yes. Ah, that's so amazing.
I love it. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Thank you for answering all our questions and more.
I know. Thank you so much for your work, your love and your light that you give to your patients, that you give to yourself, so that you're able to give it back to us. And, you know, we love and respect you. Thank you so much, Renee.
Oh, thank you so much. I love and respect both of you.
Thank you. Well, with that, enjoy the rest.
We're logging off. Baby boomers. this episode. Amazing, Renee. Yay. Yay.
Oh my gosh, that combo was so amazing. We just took a masterclass on how to better navigate our own emotions and the world at large. Yes,